What would you ask a lawyer if you could ask them anything? My brother and I opened up an answering machine to allow friends and family to do just that. The questions we received were remarkable. So remarkable, in fact, that we decided to turn them into a podcast. Now, while this podcast isn't legal advice and it's just for fun, we think you're really going to like what you hear. With that being said, my name's Nathan Beam, and I help run a personal injury law firm in Melbourne, Florida.
My name's Riley Beam, and I'm a personal injury attorney.
And from the law offices of Douglas R. Beam, this is Good Questions for Bad Days.
Is the movie Double Jeopardy legit?
All right, Riley, the 1999 film Double Jeopardy. Just to go over the plot with you, Riley, this film starts with Ashley Judd, who's the main character, and she's married to a man, and they go sailing to do a romantic, cruise in Washington State where they live. While on this cruise, Ashley Judd wakes up. Her character does. They wake up to see that there's blood on the boat and her husband is gone. Essentially what ends up happening is she gets arrested for the murder of her husband based on this. His body's never found. No one knows where he is. But she ends up going to prison and ends up realizing while she's in prison that her husband is not dead. And in fact, her husband has moved away. And so, it's pretty insane. And so while in prison, she finds out that there's this concept called Double Jeopardy. And it is explained to her by one of the characters as essentially saying, if you're charged with a crime, just like broadly, you can commit that crime again with no consequences, is how it's described in the film. So Ashley Judd's character goes on a journey where she worked to eventually find her husband, her ex-husband, I guess you could say, who is living under a new alias now in Louisiana, and she murders him there and walks freely because of the Double Jeopardy clause, as explained. Yeah, so it's pretty crazy, It's a pretty wild film, and I figured what we could do is we could talk about some of the concepts in this film and just kind of walk through experience. Right. This beginning incident of the murder, okay? Does this happen a lot? Are people normally falsely accused in this sort of manner?
Yeah, it's pretty rare for someone to be, one, framed for murder, and two, usually find a body, but you can still be convicted of a murder using other types of evidence. So you don't need to have a body. It makes it a lot harder. If you don't have a body, you don't know how the person died. You don't know, like you said, if they're even still alive. But there has been history. It's much more difficult. And you can get convicted of stuff you didn't do if a jury believes, a strong case that the prosecution puts on that everything points to you. There's blood all over your boat. Who else could have done it? Jury goes, I believe it. And there you go. So now you're in jail or prison for something you didn't do. That happens a lot.
So it sounds like point number one. It sounded like Double Jeopardy on the first point. This could be slightly legitimate. Let's move to the next. I want to hit a second point out of three, which is Double Jeopardy. Yeah. What is it? How do you understand it? I know you're not a law professor, but just a general overview. What is it and how does it work?
Yeah, Double Jeopardy is the concept you can't be tried for the same crime twice. So if you take a candy bar from the store, you go to trial, you win, you're found not guilty, they can't go back and say, we want to redo, we want to try this again, try you for the same crime. Because that used to happen. People would go, just keep it over and over, and they would never, it's an endless cycle of being, charged with a crime and having it hang over your head.
Did it kind of make, prosecution this really crazy force to kind of be dealt with, where it could be kind of like personal vendettas could be played out again and again in court?
Right. And so that's kind of all tied in with the idea of having a jury of your peers and having, certain types of evidence excluded in cases that are unfair for people to hear, jurors to hear about. So it's the idea of a fair trial, and then the idea that you will not be perpetually charged by the government. So that's for one crime. So if you go in the store and steal a candy bar, but then the next day you go in the store and steal the candy bar, you can be tried separately. Those are separate crimes.
This makes sense. And we also have different types of courts in America, right? We have state level courts as well as federal. And so let's say, you have the Florida state court is going to charge you with something. Can the federal state court charge you with that as well and try you separately so you have two different cases?
Yes, they can.
Okay. So double jeopardy doesn't apply in those terms, right?
Right. So they're actually separate. Even though it's the same thing, they're separate crimes. There's a federal crime and there's a state crime. So they both have jurisdiction over you. If it's a federal offense, stealing a candy bar is not a federal offense, but murder can be.
Yeah, this is interesting too because, in prison, if I'm understanding this correctly, this prison attorney or this former attorney who's in prison is telling Ashley Judd's character, listen, you were charged with murdering your husband, and it wasn't true. So you can murder him wherever he is, and it's fine. It's essentially a thing, which sounds clearly because there's 50 different states, right? That have different
right.
courts.
Well, one is a crime, and just because you were wrongly convicted of one crime doesn't mean you can do another crime later.
Yes.
So, yeah, in this movie, she does it in Washington, according to a jury. But another date, another time, another location, she murders her husband again. They could say, oh, our bad. We shouldn't have convicted you on the first one or whatever. But the second one, why'd you do it? You didn't have to do this. You could have told us that this guy framed you and we could have arrested him and, thrown him away for lots of different things, lots of different crimes.
So point number 2, no, they don't understand double jeopardy in the film. It sounds like it's generally a misnomer. And I guess this brings me to the third point, which I think is interesting, and I'm very curious why the script writers chose to do this. But the murder, the first quote unquote murder, this framing happens in Washington, and then the actual murder happens in Louisiana, which feels like an enormous oversight because of something you were telling me, Riley. And I would love for you to talk about this a little bit more, which is the different types of court systems we have. I know we touched on this a little bit with federal and state, but Louisiana is unique amongst court systems in the United States. Is that right? Right.
They have something called the Napoleonic Code, and it's different, but a lot of it is the same. You have this. It's not like murder is legal or something in Louisiana. They have a lot of the same laws that you have in other states. It's just structured. The court system structured differently. The way they write their laws, the way their state constitution's done, a little different than other states. But I mean, each state you go to, there's going to be differences.
Yeah. Yeah, so my understanding is that the Napoleonic is more based out of a French process and law, where the rest of it is more, UK, England, British sort of perspective.
Right. Yeah, the American, we're under the king's rule, so a lot of that stuff stuck around. A lot of the old concepts of law and fairness, if property law, things like that followed with additional rights, for accused people and for the trial system and all that. So when we founded America, we kept a lot of what England had. France is not too much different than England, again. So Louisiana was a French colony and all that. So they kind of kept the old school French stuff around too.
I like that. That's that's a beautiful thing. Well, it sounds like on the whole, Riley, is Double Jeopardy a legitimate film?
There's parts of it, but for dramatic purposes, it misses huge legal authority.
Ashley Judd, you have
broken my heart. I'm just kidding. But for those of you who are looking to Double Jeopardy or other 1990s films for legal help, we suggest that you just skip those and maybe reach out to an attorney. If you're facing a legal issue, particularly a personal injury one, call us. With over $100 million in settlements and verdicts for families in Central Florida, we've gotten pretty good at what we do. And in the 35 years we've been open, the reviews and the word from the community, I think, is representative of that. So if you're facing any sort of legal issue, you should call us. If we can't help you, there's a really good chance that we know someone who can. And hey, if you're an attorney who's listening to this podcast and is looking for co-counsel in Florida, you should also give us a call. We regularly work on multi-million-dollar cases and would be happy to help. You can reach us at 321-723-6591 or at dougbeam.com. And from all of us, the law office of Douglas R. Beam, we really appreciate you listening, and we're looking forward to answering more good questions for bad days.